Going back to the Olympics in 2008 in Beijing, I was living in Beijing at the time,
Hmm.
and my wife was working at the British Embassy. And she went to the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. And a British diplomat that she was with, old time China hand, pointed out to her the Chinese flag bearers that were holding the Chinese flag as they came into the Olympic Park during the opening ceremony. And he pointed out Pandu. He pointed out Pandu and said, "Oh, I met her years ago. She came into the embassy for a talk." He said, when we were interviewing them, they said that they had found a body up high in the mountain and that it had a camera on it.
Following is a conversation with Wayne Wilcox, a retired American Marine infantry officer and Reserve Special Forces officer. He became a special agent with the Diplomatic Security Service, serving domestically and overseas, including tours in Beijing and Sarajevo. Wayne first reached out to Mark Synnott after Mark's book, The Third Pole, was released, and Wayne had been holding on to some information that he had learned in 2008. He had learned that Pandu, the woman who had summited with the 1975 Chinese expedition, had said that she and the team had found the body of Sandy Irvine and that a camera had been taken down from that expedition. That story has since changed. However, the roots of that story are what I was after when I reached out to Wayne recently in the aftermath of the Salon article that Mark Synnott wrote. Also, the interview with Mark on this channel, as of this interview, has received over 195,000 views. So when Mark had said something to the nature of, "I don't understand why this story isn't catching on," it appears to have caught on a little bit. Before we get to the interview, I hope you'll take a moment to subscribe, to like, and to more importantly, to comment on this video and let me know what you think about it. And also hit the little bell beside the subscribe button so you'll be notified when other videos of this nature come out. That Wayne was a special agent with the Diplomatic Security Service of the State Department of the United States of America, who went on to set up a security consulting company in Hong Kong, working throughout Asia, should put to rest any thoughts that the sources of Mark's story lacked credibility. Wayne had been sitting on this information since 2008 during the Beijing Olympics, before which took place a Chinese cleanup of the upper parts of the mountain, which I have mentioned before in previous videos. The Chinese were preparing for the Olympic torch to be brought up to the summit of Mount Everest and did an extensive cleanup to remove debris and bodies from the mountain. Here's my interview with Wayne Wilcox from his home in London, England. Hey, so Wayne, thank you. I guess you reached out to Mark. Is it correct that, and you read his book and thought, whoa, this
I
is...
did. I saw the reviews for his book, and I thought, here was a guy who's interested in the same thing I was, and he might be able to do something with the information I was sitting on.
So what was the story that you shared with Mark? And so you were interested, maybe someday you might write your own book or something, but what's the kind of the format for how this all started?
Well, going back to the Olympics in 2008 in Beijing, I was living in Beijing at the time, and my wife was working at the British Embassy. And she went to the opening ceremonies of the Olympics, and a British diplomat that she was with, old time China hand, pointed out to her the flag bearers that were holding the Chinese flag bearers that were holding the Chinese flag as they came into the Olympic Park during the opening ceremony. And he pointed out Pandu, who was a climber. I'd never heard of her before. So at this point, this is secondhand. This is my wife coming home from the ceremony and telling me about this. He pointed out Pandu and said, "Oh, I met her years ago. She came into the embassy for a talk." And she was from the climbing team, the Chinese team that climbed Everest, first team that climbs Everest.
The
And
1975 expedition.
the 1975 expedition.
Mhm.
And I wasn't a big Everest scholar, but I had read, as many people, outdoorsy people, I'd kind of followed things especially when they found Mallory's body a few years before that. Must have been about 2006 or something.
The discovery of George Mallory's body was 1999.
Was it that early? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that was still in my mind.
Mm.
And when he started talking about Pandu, and he said, yeah, they had an interesting story. When we were interviewing them, they said that they had found a body up high in the mountain and that it had a camera on it. And that they had taken the camera back to Beijing and tried to develop it and couldn't find any pictures. And so this is the story he told my wife. And I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. That's the camera that they're looking for on Sandy Irvine's body, which they haven't found yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I just knew this as being an outside magazine reader.
Yeah. Right.
And I'd read that book, Ghosts of Everest, Detectives on Everest.
Yep, Jochen Hemleb's books. Yep.
Right.
Right.
Right. So I asked my wife to set up an appointment for me with this diplomat, and we met for lunch, and we went over it and we discussed, where was the meeting, who was there, roughly when it was, why did you have the meeting in the first place, and did you record any information about the meeting? And I took some scribbled notes, and we had a good lunch, and he laughed and tells a good story. And at that point, I thought, well, how do I go forward with this? I had a friend who worked for The Economist in Beijing, and I told him the story, and he said, well, I can loan you one of my reporters to go interview her. So he sent one of his Chinese language staff reporters to interview Pandu with a list of questions about the camera. And I think you've seen the interview transcript.
Mm-hmm.
But the gist of it is in the Salon magazine article and the afterword to the second edition of Mark's book.
Yeah.
But the gist of it was that, yes, she recalled them finding a body up high. She doesn't remember the story about the camera, but she does remember the body. And the reporter was kind of under the impression that she was, kind of being very cautious about what she said in the interview. So armed with the interview and my sketchy notes from this meeting with the diplomat, who we really don't want to name, I decided that, well, this looked like it could have the makings for a magazine article. This is the kind of thing that outside magazine would eat up.
Mm.
So I did a little web research, the members of the 1975 expedition, who Pandu was. I think that was before Wikipedia was big, so I didn't have the information that's out there now about her. And I put it all in a folder and said, right, the next stop will be the Royal Geographical Society in London, because the diplomat had said that there was a representative from the Royal Geographical Society in the meeting with him. He couldn't quite remember the name of the guy. He thought he was close to it, but he was trying to remember. And I didn't push him for it, because at that point, that didn't seem to be the important thing. So when we moved to London, the Olympics was in 2008. We moved back to London in 2009. And sometime after that, I went up to the Royal Geographical Society and presented this information and said, if this is true, there should be a memo in your files somewhere in your Everest files about this meeting. And at that time, she didn't seem to be so excited about this story that that she was going to go digging through the archives. And she gave me some guy's name and said, he might be able to help you out, and suggest maybe go to Q archives, the government archives, and see if there was a copy of the memo that had gone to the Foreign Office. So after this, I kind of tucked all this stuff into a folder and set it aside, and every now and then, I'd come across it in that pile of paperwork on my desk over there, and I'd look at it and say, be a nice story sometime. Maybe when I retire, I can get to write it. And then I saw the reviews for Mark's new book, and I thought I would feed it to him, and the rest he took the information, he interviewed the diplomat, he interviewed my wife to get some background color on what the night of the Olympic opening ceremony was like. He found a memo, I'm not sure which memo he found, and it all points back to the same conclusion, that it looks as if the Chinese found the camera and either tried to develop the film and messed it up, or developed the film and found nothing there. Or they developed the film and found that there was evidence that they had made it to the top, and they didn't want that evidence coming out because they wanted to be the first to get up their side of the mountain. And that's where we leave it. We have the camera is still missing. Sandy Irvine's body is still missing. And we're not in a position now to be going and asking favors of the Chinese government to troll through their mountaineering museum.
Yeah.
Wow. So the diplomat, who is not to be named, who wishes to retain anonymity.
He'd like to keep his retirement in peace and quiet.
Got it. Okay. And so that gentleman is still alive, though.
He is.
And has the actual note, like there's some scribble sheets or that. So there's a.
No, I think he was relying on his memory to talk to Mark. And the only thing that we found, Mark found a memo in one of the archives he went through. It might have been a Q.
Right. And so you met the interview with Pandu sounds like the original story that was shared at that point in time about there having been a camera it kind of went away. That story disappeared, as did very possibly the idea that even a body of an old English dead was discovered. So a lot changed in that.
Well, they admitted that they found the body. She admitted in 2008 that they found the body. It was that she didn't remember about the camera.
And you said, though, at that time she acted, I suspiciously would be a pretty strong word, but she seemed to change the subject or something.
She seemed to be forgetful,
okay.
Which could possibly be deliberately forgetful. But now I'm pushing stuff out there. I wasn't in the room.
Yeah, no, totally. And so were there any questions asked about like the clothing or the position or how the body was or any landmarks near it that might?
There were a few questions like that. The interview was all done in Chinese. The transcript I have of it was in Chinese. I had to get a friend of my wife's, a Brit who reads Chinese, to translate it back into English. So working with Chinese is somewhat difficult because some things don't translate directly. But they did discuss tent fabric and color and things like that.
Wayne, to give some context to this, could you tell me a little bit about your career and how you got to Beijing and why you lived there, and if you will, your career track. And then just before we wrap up, a little insight again about kind of the Chinese culture, if you will, and how sometimes people will listen to a story like this and there's a disconnect. I can't imagine the Chinese wouldn't share this story with the family of Sandy Irvine because they've been mourning his loss all these years. So there's just a kind of a disconnect there. So can you give me a little bit of a background about yourself and what you learned about that?
Well, my background, after university, I joined the military, and from there went on to the State Department, the Bureau of Diplomatic Security. So those are the guys that run security at American embassies overseas. And from 93 to 95, I was at the American Embassy in Beijing, which is where I met my wife, who was at the British Embassy in Beijing.
Excellent.
And after my subsequent tour in Sarajevo, my wife and I decided to get married, and I was going to follow her career around as a diplomat. So I resigned from the State Department and set myself up in security consulting. And I had a job in Hong Kong, which was my wife's next posting. So we spent 4 years in Hong Kong. I had a security company going. We moved back to London, and I worked various corporate security jobs. And finally, when she got assigned to go overseas again to Singapore, I put my CV out there and ended up getting offered a job in Singapore for a Canadian company, setting up their security for Asia Pacific. About a year into that Singapore tour, she got transferred to Beijing, and my boss was able to transfer my job from Singapore to Beijing. And that's how we ended up to be in Beijing for the time of the Olympics.
Wow. Wow. And so in that time, you're essentially in the business of kind of working at governmental levels, or at least that's the lens that you have in a way. So if I'm interviewing,
It is.
yeah, this guy, Wayne Wilcox, you're not going to be like, oh, I heard there was a camera, they developed it. Like, you're not going to just go off on this wishful thinking thing. You're a facts guy.
Well, and somewhat of a diplomat in the sense that, I understand, by the time of the Olympics, I'd lived in China and or Hong Kong for 6, 7, 8 years. I've spent 14 years of my life in Asia. And I understood you have to be subtle. You can't necessarily be direct. Sometimes asking a direct question is not going to get you the answers you're looking for. You have to understand that there is no private public separation in China. Everything is the state. The mountaineering team was not a bunch of private citizens the way it would be in the West. It is the Chinese government's mountaineering team and their expedition. And you don't get to speak about that. Speaking about that would be considered speaking about state secrets, potentially, if they were sensitive enough about that. Pandu is gone now, so she doesn't have to worry about that anymore. But that's the kind of environment and the sensitivity that you have to have. It's why we're keeping the British diplomat's name quiet, is he doesn't want to end up the rest of his life being hounded by people who want to make his life miserable.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. That's super helpful. So for the real sleuths out there, for the mystery hunters who might either doubt this, but there's enough information in it to continue looking, is there what thoughts would you have? Like, what would be the way to just kind of keep digging here? Or would it be a complete luck, but to find a a Chinese person who has some context to the story to kind of on the aside go, hey, I got some secret information for you?
If that memo of that conversation could be found that squarely has Pandu saying, yes, we found the camera and here's where we sent it, that would be a smoking gun. There's always a chance that someone could be friendly with the Chinese Mountaineering Association and get into their headquarters, and someone would slip and tell them, oh yes, here's the camera that we found on the 1975 expedition. I think that's a pretty long shot.
Yeah, yeah. So Wayne, how about this as kind of a last question? And this takes you out of your realm in a way because it makes you speculate, but why on earth would they not tell the world about something like this? It's driving hundreds of thousands of people like crazy, or thousands at least. Of a lot of 175,000 people have watched my interview with Mark, that it's only been up for 4 weeks. So there's a lot of people be like,
wow, I haven't watched that.
I'll send you the link. Yeah.
Send me the link.
Yeah, I will indeed.
Why?
Yeah.
The Chinese and Asians in general have a very strong culture of saving face. In their view, there'd be no upside to showing that someone else got to the top of Everest before their 1975.
1960 was the, yeah.
1960.
Was the original, their first descent, and then the 75.
Their first one.
Yeah, yeah.
But to have anyone get up the Chinese side, the Tibetan side, before them would be a loss of face. You know, it's bad enough that some foreigners got up the other side before them. So there's that. At this point, releasing the information now would make it look like they were holding on to it as a cover-up. So there's no upside for them to release the information right now. You know, getting a pat on the back from the Western climbing community isn't enough.
Right. Yeah, yeah, gotcha. That's perfect.
Does that make sense?
It sure does. It sure does. And you are a diplomat as well. You know,
and if they admitted that they tried to develop the film and botched the developing, there's no upside to admitting that. That makes them look like incompetence.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, because yes, if we found that camera today, we'd be sending it off to Kodak or someone specialist who knew what they were doing to try and recover that film. You know, just like when they recover film from deep sea wrecks and things like that.
As we wrapped up our interview, Wayne asked rhetorically if I thought the mystery would ever be solved. And in my mind, I look at this as something that perhaps is better off not solved. Would it be so bad to not know of the fate of Mallory and Irvine, particularly about whether they made the summit or not? George Mallory and Sandy Irvine evoke a sense of wonder and possibility in the hearts and souls of those who follow this amazing mystery. Thanks for watching. I'll bring back more interviews and peel back as many layers as I possibly can about this incredible and enduring mystery. Thanks again for watching.